In June of 2021, a little girl went missing from her family's rural property in Tennessee. The case got the national attention most missing persons advocates would love to have, but then it went too far and impeded the investigation. While we debate the balance between reporting information and hurting a case, Summer Moon Utah Wells remains missing to this day. I'm Charlie, and welcome to Crimelines. Hello and welcome to Day 4 of the 12 Days of Crimelines, where I'm covering 12 missing persons cases within the month. Today we are talking about a more recent missing persons case, and unfortunately, this is one that requires a disclaimer before I get into it, and I hate giving disclaimers on cases. But this case has gotten a lot of publicity, mostly on YouTube, and not all of it has been helpful to the case. Some of it has been actively harmful, and I believe it crossed some ethical lines, and it even includes people allegedly committing more crimes like trespassing in their pursuit for, they'd say answers, but I don't think it is unfair to say that at least some of them were there mostly for clicks and views. I am a true crime podcaster who makes money doing this, so I am not sitting up on some high horse. And I get that it isn't always an either-or situation when it comes to motives for covering a case, but lines have definitely been crossed here to the point that this case gets so mired in drama that law enforcement has all but stopped talking to the public about it, and people who might know something may be too scared to get caught up in the middle of online harassment that they just won't come forward. I will touch a little on the impact of social media on this case as it is relevant, but I'm not going to call anyone out by name. And I do not want to put myself in the drama of the people who are involved in this case, whether they're involved in it by force, like family and neighbors, or they're people who choose to be involved, like true crime content creators. I am going to try to stay focused on the timeline of this case using vetted information and what we need to know to help bring Summer Wells home. So with that out of the way, let's get started, and we are going to start with Summer. She was born on February 4th, 2016, to Don and Candace Wells. She was the fourth child and the only girl in the family, and her family has described her as playful and happy, and really just a typical kid. In 2021, Summer was living with her parents and her three older brothers in Hawkins County, Tennessee. The family lived in a very rural area not far off Beach Creek Road, and they were over 30 minutes outside of downtown Rogersville and about 25 minutes from Kingsport. The family has posted drone footage of their property and the outside of the house that you can see on YouTube, and it was really helpful to me in getting an idea of the layout. I'll have it linked in my sources. And Candace, Summer's mom, also did an inside tour with Chris McDonough of the Interview Room YouTube channel, and that will also be linked to my sources. Since Summer went missing from the family's property, the layout is pretty important to understanding the case. The house they lived in was a small one with a main floor where there was a kitchen and the boys had their rooms. To access the semi-finished basement where the parents, Candace and Dawn, and Summer had their bedrooms, you had to go through what is almost like a trap door from the kitchen. The house is set on the top of a hill, and it is built into the hill a bit, so this is a walkout basement. To get in and out of the house, you can either use the front door that leads to the main floor or the back door that leads out of the basement. It is a pretty small house for a family with 4 kids, but what they had plenty of was space outside, around 11 acres. Unlike all of these Midwest cases I like to cover where rural means fields and farmland, this property is actually heavily forested. There is a clearing immediately around the house, and there is a dirt driveway and room for the kids to play, but otherwise, it's just trees. And being that they're in the foothills of the Appalachian Mountains, this is a rocky area with steep hills all around. It wasn't just Dawn, Candace, and the kids living on the property. Candace's mother lived in a camper about 20 feet from the front door on the other side of that driveway. Grandma's name is also Candace, just like Summer's mom, and some people online started calling her Grandis to tell them apart, which I thought was kind of a cute nickname at first, but it sounds to me like she actually goes by Candy, so that is what I'll call her. So just for clarity, remember that Candace is Summer's mom and Candy is the grandma. Now that we have the terrain described and the people living there established, let's get into what happened the day Summer disappeared. I built out my timeline using 3 different sources. One is the Rogersville Review, and the other 2 are interviews done by Chris McDonough of the YouTube channel The Interview Room. One interview is with Summer's mother, Candace, and the other was with a 15-year-old family friend who we are going to call Jake. That is not his name, but I like to avoid naming minors on my show. I know I started this episode pretty much criticizing YouTube content creators, and now I'm using one as a major source, but I want to clarify that Chris McDonough has 2 things that a lot of case commentators, including myself, don't have. One is a background in homicide investigations, and 2 is original interviews with people who were with Summer the day she went missing. Not all of his content on the case is just straight interview material. He has plenty of commentary as well, and I'll link his channel in my sources if you're interested in that. That is not what we're doing here, so I am just using the interviews. Jake and Candace do not always tell the same story of exactly what happened, and so where their discrepancies are important, I will point it out. So this case starts on Tuesday, June 15th, 2021. Grandma Candy had hurt her knee a few weeks before this, and the pain had gotten worse, so she wanted to go have it checked out. Candace agreed to drive her to the ER that morning to get it examined, and she took 5-year-old Summer with her, leaving the 3 boys home alone. Their dad, Don, was at work about 45 minutes away, and the boys at the time were 9, 11, and 12. The drive to the hospital in Kingsport was about 25 minutes, and rather than sit in the ER with a bored 5-year-old, Candace dropped Candy off and then went to a friend's house who lived near the hospital. When Candy let Candace know she was ready to be picked up after being seen, Candace's friend's 15-year-old son, who we are calling Jake, wanted to go with her. According to him, it's because Candace mentioned she might take Summer fishing and he wanted to go, but Candace said they did not have plans to go fishing. Jake just wanted to get out of the house and away from a grandma who had been nagging him. It's not clear how long Candace and Summer were at the friend's house because stories vary, and one account was that they were there pretty much only long enough to pick Jake up. Regardless of those details, Candace drove with Summer and Jake to pick up Candy, and then they ran some errands, which is not uncommon when you live nearly an hour round trip from most stores. You take advantage of being in town. So they went to a smoke shop and Candace bought vapes and also a hard iced tea. Then they went to the pharmacy to drop off Candy's prescription from the doctor. While they were in the drive-through line at the pharmacy, Summer's father, Don, called Candace. Jake said Don said something about a creepy guy being on their property, but Candace said Don never said that. He was just calling to check in. When Candace pulled up to the drop-off window at the pharmacy, she was told it would be about 30 minutes before the prescription would be ready for pickup. It was hot and sitting in the vehicle didn't sound like fun, so Candace decided to take Summer to a nearby state park, which is called Warrior's Path, so that she could go swimming in the cove there. According to Candace, when they got to the park, Jake and Summer got out of the truck first. Jake went off into the woods and Summer went to the edge of the water to wait on Candace to catch up so that she could get in and start swimming. Candy, who was walking slowly due to her knee issue, was headed towards the shore to look at some flowers. Jake said that during the time Summer was in the water, he and Candace sat on the shore and smoked the vape and shared the hard iced tea, which, if true, is an issue I imagine Jake's mom would have with Candace. Jake was 15 and should not have been given nicotine or alcohol from a trusted adult. There is a major discrepancy in what came next. Candace said that Summer was just playing in the water, splashing and having fun, and Candace even took a video of her. But according to Jake, at one point, Summer went under the water, possibly after slipping on a rock. He said that Candace didn't really react, but he did, running over to make sure Summer was okay because she was under the water for a while. He estimated it was like 20 seconds, but he said Summer seemed fine. Candace has flat out said that this is a lie, that Summer did stick her face in the water and go under for fun, but she came right back up each time. There was no time she was under the water to the point that she had to be rescued. And in looking at the video Candace took of Summer playing in the water, Candace's story does sound plausible, unless they moved to a different section of the cove, or maybe farther out into a deeper section, because the area they were in was pretty shallow. Summer was only 5 years old, and the water was just up to her waist. She could sit on the bottom and still have her head above water. It's hard to imagine a scenario where she went under for 20 seconds and struggled to get back up without there also being a secondary issue, like she also hit her head or she got stuck on something. It's just odd because obviously one of them isn't telling the truth, but the question is why? If Summer didn't go under the water, why say she did? And if she did go under the water, that happens. She was grabbed and pulled back up, and even Jake said she was okay. She walked back to the truck with no issues. There doesn't appear to be a reason for either of them to lie about this. And while the internet is not exactly the arbiter of the truth, I will say from my reading of comment sections on YouTube, forums, and Facebook posts, it seems like it's a 50-50 split on who people believe. There are just as many people who think Jake is lying for attention as think Candace is lying to obscure what really happened, or maybe just to hide her general lack of supervision over her child. But regardless, Jake and Candace's timelines do line up in saying that they all got back into the truck, they picked up Candy's prescription, they got drinks at Sonic, and then they went to the grocery store. Jake and Summer stayed in the truck together while Candace and Candy ran into the store. Candace said they were in there for like 5 minutes, but Jake said it was more like an hour. They only bought milk and cheese, so I think Candace may be closer to the true time, but I doubt either of them were looking at a clock. They were probably just estimating, and maybe it felt like 5 minutes to Candace, but it felt like an hour to the 15-year-old who was stuck sitting in a truck with a 5-year-old. After they made their purchase, Candace dropped Jake back off at his house, and Candace said she, Candy, and Summer then started driving home. Summer fell asleep in the backseat of the truck, and Candace told her mom to take a picture. This is a pretty famous image in the case because it's the last known video or photo of Summer Wells. Candace said she noticed Summer fell asleep with her arm up behind her head like her father Don tended to do, so she asked Candy, who wasn't driving, to take a picture. Candy turned to do it, but ended up setting her phone on video, as can sometimes happen, and instead she took a very short recording of Summer asleep in the back seat rather than taking a photo. Because this is a video, we can hear what they're saying. Candace asked Candy if Summer still had her arm up, and Candy said no, and then Candace said what sounds to me like, quote, "Oh, that's what I was trying to catch," which is 100% in line with why she later said she wanted the photo. So all of that tracks, but there are a few things about this that are still a little weird. For instance, it is hot out, and Summer is dressed in long sleeves. Candace said it was because Summer tended to get cold in the vehicle, but then we see Summer asleep with her head resting on a milk jug that they just bought, which would have been probably pretty cold. So she was so cold she had to be in long sleeves in hot weather, but warm enough that she wants to lay on a cold milk jug. I agree with everyone who looks at this and thinks it looks a little odd, but I will also say that I have had enough children to know that there is no accounting for what a 5-year-old will do. They will wear what they want to wear, and they will fall asleep pretty much anywhere, anytime, except their bed at bedtime, And so it could have just been a quirky 5-year-old moment. What this video really does provide us with is something pretty handy in this case, and that is a timestamp. It was taken just after 3 p.m. The days are getting shorter, and for many of us, it means we're inside more, and it also means curling up with a good mystery. If you're like me, you are a detective at heart, and you're always trying to get to the bottom of a story, so that is where today's sponsor, newspapers.com, comes in. Imagine getting to uncover all those small local details about a decades-old crime. This is the information that doesn't make it into the documentaries. It's the information I'm always digging for to bring to my podcast. But sometimes you find things you don't expect, like the community's reactions in op-eds and letters to the editors, or maybe even something like a classified ad that tells you what the suspect was doing during that time, maybe putting them at the right place at the right time. Newspapers.com is really a treasure trove for anyone who loves true crime. They have over 29,000 papers dating back to 1690. I love their search feature. It is so easy to search by name, dates, and locations, and then see how the events you think you know so well were originally reported. And a newspapers.com subscription makes a great gift for the true crime fan in your life. Just head over to newspapers.com/gift to learn more and purchase a subscription for that someone special. Use code Crimelines at checkout for an exclusive 20% discount. That's newspapers.com/gift. Your favorite armchair detective will thank you. It wouldn't have been long after this that Candace, Candy, and Summer all got home. Candace had the boys help bring in the groceries they bought while she helped Candy get to her camper. Candace was inside the house with the kids for a bit when she noticed that her mother, Candy, was sitting outside, and she asked, did she need anything? What was she up to? What's going on? Candy said she wanted to plant some flowers she had, transferring them into larger pots. So Candace offered to help, and she asked Summer if she wanted to come and help. And Summer did. She loved flowers and she loved gardening. After Summer finished helping, she washed her hands, stayed outside for about 5 or 10 more minutes, and then told her mom she wanted to go inside to play. Candace told her she could. Candace said she walked with Summer about halfway to the house when Summer ran ahead and went inside. Candace could see through the front door that the boys were sitting in the kitchen area watching videos on the TV they had mounted there, so she went to the door and yelled to the boys to keep an eye on Summer for a minute while she went and helped Grandma fix her knee brace. She planned on coming right back after that. Candace said it was no more than 5 minutes later when she went inside and asked the boys where Summer was. They said she went downstairs to her room to play, so Candy yelled down to Summer and got no response. She asked the boys if they were sure Summer was down there, and they said yes. So Candace went down there and didn't see Summer, so she went outside, and then she went back through the house, and then she went outside again, calling for Summer the whole time. She couldn't find her, and not knowing what to do, she called her husband Don at work, and Don told Candace to call 911, which she did. She did go over to her mother's camper to borrow her mother's cell phone, which reportedly got better reception in their rural area than Candace's prepaid phone did. Don ended up calling 911 himself as well as he headed home from work, and both of the 911 calls came in around 6:30 in the evening. The actual 911 calls have not been released, but the dispatch audio to responding officers has been made public. And in it, the dispatcher said, quote, "The parents have called in, advised that the mother had went for a walk, came home, and now they can't find her. They have been yelling for her. She has been gone for about 10 minutes now." End quote. So to get into this dispatch call a little bit, we don't know why the dispatcher said that Candace said she went for a walk, because Candace said she didn't say this. But people see it as a changing story. Personally, I would not be surprised if something just got misunderstood. This happens a lot with dispatch. They are trying to get the most important details down, and the full story isn't really what they're going for. They just want what the responding officers need to know. It's possible Candace said she walked back from her mother's camper when she realized Summer was missing, and the dispatcher would have had no way of knowing that the camper was only 20 to 30 feet from the front door. They may have assumed Candace meant she walked a few doors down, hence she went for a walk. We know the dispatcher also broadcast Summer's age as 4 when she was 5, but again, the age range was more relevant to the emergency situation than an exact age, so it doesn't really matter that the dispatcher got this wrong, or even that Candace's story got mixed up. Until the 911 calls are released, the public will not know what story Candace told the dispatcher. But I have been covering true crime for a long time, and I've listened to countless 911 calls and the outgoing dispatch audio, and the details do get jumbled. A more interesting and I think relevant discrepancy here would be the timeline of the afternoon. Candace said Summer was only missing for 10 minutes or so when she called Dawn and then 911. The calls came in around 6:30, so let's say Candace was estimating on the low end, and Summer was actually missing more like 20 minutes. That means Summer went missing around 6:10. But we have a neighbor and her 2 teen children who all 3 told the police that they heard a scream roughly around 4:30 p.m. And they were worried enough about what they heard that they went outside to look for the source of it. They didn't see anything, so they went about their day. The police have said they don't have a reason to believe the scream was related to Summer's case, and it's not clear if that's because they know the source of the noise or because it doesn't fit with what they know of the timeline. We don't know what the authorities do know about the timeline because they're not saying. The last time I saw an official comment on what time Summer Wells was last seen was back in 2022, and the Tennessee Bureau of Investigation simply said that to preserve the integrity of the investigation, they would not get specific. So we don't even know if Candace stuck to her original story of Summer going missing between 6 and 6:30, or if she expanded it to the police. I'll be honest, this wouldn't be the first case where a parent was too generous with the time they last saw their kid in order to cover up some lax supervision. So I think that's a possibility. If Candace thought Summer had wandered off into the woods and would be found soon enough, she didn't also want to get in trouble for not watching her closely, so she fudged the time. It's my understanding, based on the family's website, that they did recently have a Department of Children's Services investigation, and the social worker had been out to the house just the day before Summer went missing. Whatever the parents were accused of, they have been cleared in, so that is not entirely relevant. But if you recently had a DCS case in your family, you may be hesitant to say or do anything that will put you in their spotlight again. Child services could show up at my front door today, and I know I have nothing to worry about, but it would still be stressful. I wouldn't exactly want to bring that into my life either. So though the TBI won't give us an exact time they think Summer went missing or even a range, for the sake of anyone listening who lives in the area and may have heard or seen something, just because you saw it at 5:30 or 5:45, don't rule it out. That tip should be called in. So that is the timeline of the day Summer disappeared. Now we're going to get into the rest of the timeline, which is the timeline of the investigation. And this comes almost entirely from the Tennessee Bureau of Investigation's newsroom, though I also use some media sources. Everything's in the sources link in my show notes. First responders arrived to the property and joined in a massive search of the area. It was slow going because of how dangerous and rugged the terrain was, and to make matters worse, there was terrible cell phone coverage up there, so searchers had trouble communicating as they made their way through. At midnight, the Tennessee Bureau of Investigation, aka the TBI, released an endangered child alert which went out to the mainstream media and was posted on social media. When Summer still hadn't been found about 11 hours later, an Amber Alert was issued, and it remains active to this day. Early on in the investigation, the TBI had pretty regular communication with the media, holding press conferences to give updates and to give specific pleas to the public. Like 2 days after Summer went missing, when they asked people who lived near the family's property on the corner of Ben Hill Road and Beach Creek Road to check any security cameras they had or trail cams. They wanted to know about any suspicious vehicles or people, or if Summer was lost in the woods, any sign of her. They also asked that sheds and barns and other outbuildings be searched, pretty much anywhere a lost little girl may have taken shelter. 11 days after Summer went missing, while the searches of the woods in the area were continuing, the TBI announced that they were looking for the driver of a red or maroon Toyota Tacoma pickup truck. Someone who drove through the area regularly for work said that they may have seen the truck parked in the area of Beach Creek Road and Ben Hill Road in the late afternoon/early evening of Tuesday, June 15th. That would be right in the window of when Summer went missing. However, this witness also said they were not 100% sure of that date. They could have seen the truck on the 14th. They said it was an older model, 1998 to 2000, with a full bed ladder rack and white buckets in the truck bed. Unfortunately, no cameras picked up this truck, but it is worth remembering that this is a rural area without traffic cameras or businesses with security cameras, so lots of things are not recorded out there. A picture of what the truck may look like has been passed around on social media, but the TBI clarified that the picture was not released by them, and it is not a picture of the actual truck, as some mistakenly believed. And people who thought that was a picture of the actual truck also thought that meant the truck had been found, which it has not been. The family has said they don't know anyone who drives a truck like that, and they've never seen one in the area before. Shortly after the truck information was released, some more information was put out into the media, and that was that Summer Wells was not the first person in her family to go missing. Years before Summer was even born, in August of 2009, Summer's maternal aunt disappeared. So this was Candy's daughter and Candace's little sister. The two cases appear to have no link, so I'm not bringing it up because it's relevant to Summer's disappearance, but because there's an opportunity to get some attention on a lesser-known missing persons case, so we're going to take it. I'm just going to cover the basics. According to the Charlie Project, 21-year-old Rose Bly left her home in St. Croix Falls, Wisconsin on August 21st, 2009. She was heading about 5 miles away to Cushing to meet up with her cousin at a bar, and she told her husband she would be home by midnight. Not only did she not make it home by midnight, she never even made it to the bar. 5 days later, Rose's car was found in a parking lot in Grantsburg, Wisconsin, which is about 17 miles north of her home. Rose did have family in that town, and she even went to high school there, so it is a place she was familiar with. It seemed possible that maybe her plans had changed somewhere along the way that caused her to drive to meet up with someone in Grantsburg instead of Cushing. The car, when it was found, was in good shape. It hadn't run out of gas, it didn't break down, and there was no damage like she had been in an accident. The keys were missing, and it looked like Rose just parked it and walked away. The FBI notes that this parking lot was an area where truck drivers would park overnight, which is kind of a scary thought because if she got picked up by a trucker, she could be anywhere. The Charlie Project noted 2 things that happened in the months leading up to Rose's disappearance, and either of them could be relevant. One was that her husband filed for divorce in June of 2009 after a tumultuous relationship with accusations of abuse going both ways. They did opt to reconcile, and they were living together at the time Rose disappeared. Then, a week before she went missing, Rose fell off a horse and hit her head, but she did not, according to the Charlie Project, seek medical attention. She told her mother, Candy, that she was still having headaches after the fall, so of course Candy told her to go get it checked out, but it looks like she didn't. So those are the two things that could have contributed to her disappearance. As far as the first one, the marriage being on the rocks, the police said they don't consider her husband a suspect. We don't know why they ruled him out, but his behavior after she went missing gives the indication that he thought Rose was going to come back. When he filed for divorce and custody of their kids just 3 weeks after her disappearance, his attorney said he did this so that he could bar Rose from immediately getting access to their young daughters if or when she came back after just disappearing and being out of contact for weeks. Now, if her husband knew she was never coming back, there would have been no reason for him to go to the expense of hiring a lawyer to file to protect his custodial rights. It sounds like he thought it was possible she left of her own accord. The second possible contributing factor was the head injury. Was it possible that it was worse than Rose thought it was and she became disoriented at night and drove not to the bar but back to somewhere familiar to her hometown? Then she either wandered off or encountered someone who took advantage of her vulnerable state. No one seems to think she would have left and started a new life elsewhere, never speaking to her family or seeing her children again. And while I agree it doesn't sound likely she did this, it is still a possibility. There was another missing person, Robert Hoagland, who I fully believed was a victim of foul play, right up until the moment it was announced that he did up and leave one day, starting his life over elsewhere. No one knows what happened to Rose Bly, but it doesn't seem like her case is linked to Summers in any way, except that the same family has had to go through this twice. Summers' disappearance did renew interest in Rose's case, though, and if you know anything about the 2009 disappearance of Rose Bly, you can call the Polk County Police at 715-485-8300. Now back to the investigation into the Summer Wells disappearance. On June 27th, the ground search for Summers started to scale back, which obviously had to happen. You cannot search the same forest forever and ever without more information or clues to narrow down the search. They needed to put resources elsewhere, like into the hundreds of tips that were pouring in. Within a month of Summers' disappearance, they had nearly 1,000 tips they were working through. The TBI said no one had been cleared at that point, though Summers' father told the media that he, Candace, and Candy all passed polygraphs. And while the investigation continued, in July of 2021, Summers' 3 brothers were removed from the home and placed into foster care. As is the policy pretty much everywhere, the state would not comment on exactly why the kids were taken, but the family said it was for reasons other than Summers' disappearance. In one interview with the J is for Justice podcast, Don Wells said part of the reason was because his drinking had escalated as the rumors and innuendo around the case got to him, and the home just wasn't safe for the boys. Don does have a history with drinking, and he has an arrest history, some of which was linked to that drinking. Several months before Summer went missing in October of 2020, he was arrested because he came home one night and there was a man in the house. Don accused Candace of cheating, and allegedly he pushed her. She called the police, and he left before the police arrived. But then Don came back while the sheriff's deputy was still there, and he was stopped as he pulled up the driveway. The deputy suspected Don was drunk, and Don fully admitted to drinking that night. He also let the deputy know that there was a gun in his glove box, and then Don told him he had a felony conviction in another state, meaning he was barred from owning a gun. Don was arrested for domestic assault, possession of a handgun while under the influence, and unlawful possession of a weapon, but he ended up pleading guilty only for possession of a handgun while under the influence, and the other charges were dropped. But Candace wrote in her application for an order of protection, which she also dropped, that Don would become physically abusive when he drank, so I can see why Child Services would remove the boys if Don admits his drinking was out of control. And we know Don's drinking continued after the boys were removed because he was arrested in October of 2021 for a DUI. He pleaded guilty in February of 2022, and because his previous DUI charge had been dropped, this was his first one. So the penalty wouldn't have been too harsh, except he was still on probation for the gun charge from a year earlier. So he ended up having to go back to serve that sentence because he violated the conditions. He served 9 months before he was released in October of 2022. A few months after Don was released, he told WJHL News that he had to go out of state to find work because of, quote, drama from YouTubers. Apparently, some content creators who thought that Don and/or Candace knew what happened to Summer would show up at his work to protest, and they ended up getting him fired. Don was not the only one who was having issues with YouTubers. The TBI warned in late November 2021 that there was an increase in misinformation being spread online about Summer's case. And then in December, Candace called the sheriff's department because 6 people, 2 she recognized as YouTubers, were recording on her property. One of the same YouTubers was also accused by members of the church that Summer and her family attended of going into the church and filming minors without permission. Then in June of 2022, the TBI released a statement addressing the impact of all of this. They said that they have dealt with hundreds of tips that were generated by false information spread on social media. Of the 2,000 tips they got in the first year Summer was missing, they said the vast majority were rumors and speculation. The statement acknowledged that a lot of the attention on the case was because people genuinely cared for Summer and wanted her found. But it also said there were individuals who used the case for their own personal gain by, quote, spreading false information on social media posed as facts. Some go as far as to solicit donations. This has had a major impact on the investigation, end quote. They then had to come out and ask the public directly to stop submitting tips that weren't actual knowledge, but were just theories on the case or speculation based on a YouTube video they watched or something they saw posted on Facebook. So we know some true crime content creators covering this case were actively, negatively impacting an investigation, and I am not the one saying that. That is the TBI. What I'm saying is that I looked a little past this case, and some of them have not stopped. Either they are still covering every little rumor and speculation about the Summer Wells case, dragging people's names up and down the internet, or they have moved on to the next case. Many of them to another Tennessee case, the disappearance of Sebastian Rogers, and the reckless behavior is continuing. When it comes to Summer Wells, I do imagine the TBI got quite a few tips about that final image of Summer sleeping in the back seat against the milk jugs, because that was a huge focus of internet speculation and conversation. There were endless videos of people zooming in on every little detail of what is frankly not a very high-quality video. Some people were even speculating that Summer was dead in that video. And they were linking it back to what Jake said about Summer going under the water while they were playing at the park. People keep bringing up terms like dry drowning and secondary drowning, so I think it's probably important we define what those terms are referring to, even though they are not technically medical terms. These are complications that can occur. So, quote-unquote, dry drowning is where breathing in water causes the vocal cords to spasm and they close up. So the water never actually hits the lungs. It's just that closing up of the airways that makes it difficult to breathe, and this is an immediate reaction. This is not something that will happen down the road. Now, the other term that is something that will develop usually over the next 24 hours is the complication of quote-unquote secondary drowning. Water does get into the lungs, irritates the lungs lining, producing more fluid. This can cause breathing problems right away that may get progressively worse, and the symptoms are things like coughing, difficulty breathing, an irregular heartbeat, wheezing and gasping for breath, things that no one reports having seen Summer do, and we do not see in that video. It's pretty obvious the TBI has frustration with the theories and the speculation and the diagnosing that's going on social media. They ended up putting up on their website an FAQ on the case rather than stopping work to answer the same media questions all day. And from what I've seen of reports on the case, whenever they're reached out to for comment on anything that's not on this list, they don't tend to give any answers. So let's go over those questions and answers now because I think they're pretty important to understanding the case and the investigation. The first question is, did they search the home and property around the residence? And the answer was that they did more than once, and that includes the basement, crawl space, all of the family's vehicles, outbuildings, barrels, and other items located on the property. They have also brought in canine teams specializing in various search methods. Don Wells did make and post a video on the family's website that shows the path that he said the dogs tracked Summer's scent. It went from the back door that led to the basement and down a pretty steep and heavily wooded hill and ended at the main road. According to Don, her scent trail ended there. That information has not been released by the TBI as far as I can tell, and it is not on their FAQs, but I thought I'd add it in. Now, question number 2, have they searched phones and computers belonging to the Wells family? And the answer to that was yes, and they also analyzed cell phone and cell tower data. Question 3 is an interesting one that I think clears up a mental picture people had in their head. Some people thought it was suspicious that Grandma and Mom were planting flowers the day Summer disappeared, like an excuse to have dug up part of the yard. So this frequently asked question was, did the TBI search the flower bed? And the answer is that there was no flower bed. The flowers were being transferred into pots, and yes, they did search the pots. Question 4 was how many ground searches have been conducted, and the answer is 3 large-scale searches and dozens of smaller targeted searches, and that includes waterways with divers and numerous aerial searches. The next question that I think is interesting is who in the household had been questioned, and they said the parents have been questioned more than once, Summer's brothers, and others who had stayed in the home for any length of time in the months leading up to Summer's disappearance. They've also questioned neighbors and searched their properties and looked into registered sex offenders in the area. And then we have the question everyone is wondering, is there evidence that Summer was abducted? The answer, as of the publication of the FAQ in 2022 that has never been corrected, is no. They had not, at that point, found any evidence that points to an abduction, though that was still a line of investigation they were pursuing. I'm sure the TBI has been pursuing and exploring every possible explanation from the start, and we know that a lot of the early focus on this case was a search of the immediate area, including water, in the event Summer roamed off into the woods. This search extended across the Wells property and into the neighboring properties. There were many people who consented to have their property and buildings searched, but from what the family has said, not everyone did, especially when it came to searching inside their homes, and the family wished the police had been able to get more search warrants. The issue with getting warrants here is you can't get one just because someone lives within a mile of a missing kid. There has to be more probable cause than just that. And there are a lot of reasons people wouldn't want their homes searched. Some might just not like the idea of inviting the government into their house, but I've also read and heard about drug use in the community where the family lived, so I looked into it. Meth seems to be a massive problem in the area, and if you have meth on your property, you may not welcome the police to search. But as far as the theory that Summer got lost in the woods, the family has said they don't think it's likely because she wouldn't have wandered off. She was actually scared of going into the woods by herself due to the wildlife in the area, and she also tended to ask permission before she went anywhere. I mean, we saw how she asked if she could go the 20-30 feet from Candy's camper into the house. Summer's father, Don, also doesn't think Summer wandered off because he thinks she would have been found if that was the case. By the time he and the police got to the scene that day, the search was already started because Candace had sent her sons out with walkie-talkies to look for Summer, and she had gone to the neighbors to ask them to help. With that many people spread out and calling Summer's name, if she was in the area, Don thinks she would have heard them. He believes that she was taken off the property. She was either lured out of the house or away from the yard, which I have to say at first seems pretty hard to imagine. The idea that someone randomly snatched Summer in a time frame of a few minutes from a house on the top of a hill in a rural area while her mother and grandmother were 20 feet away, I had a hard time believing that was even possible, let alone plausible. But I don't live in a rural area and I never have, and something I didn't realize happened until I read about this case was that there are people in the area who did have strangers on their properties, not just passing through, but setting up camp. This isn't a neighborhood where fences mark off the boundaries of everyone's land. It's open forest, and due to the high poverty rate in the area, there are unhoused people who camp in the woods, without the knowledge of if they're on public property or private. There was even someone who bought a plot of land near the Wells property, and the Wells and another neighbor complained that that man was actually camping on their land. It seems there was an issue with the survey maps out in the Beach Creek community, and that man had bought just a little more than 2 acres of undeveloped land that another neighbor thought should have been part of their parcel. And it seems like a property dispute. It's not the type of legal case that interests me in the slightest. But because a little girl went missing from the area around the same time this man was on the property, his name has been dragged into it. I saw claims that he left the area shortly after Summer went missing, but to be fair, this land he bought is undeveloped, and he's in a property dispute with the neighbors over it, so maybe he's avoiding conflict by not going out there. There have been other people on the property with or without permission to either camp or stay in an outbuilding or even stay in the house with the family. It's not like the Wells family were hermits up there in Beach Creek. People did come and go, and according to the frequently asked questions that the TBI has released, the ones who have been identified have been interviewed. But what this does tell us is that even though it was a rural area, there were people around. And if Summer was abducted and it was someone who had stayed at the house, she may have willingly left with them thinking they were a friend, not a danger. This is a case where the suspect list, if you ask the internet, is really long, even though the TBI has said there is no direct evidence of an abduction. But the suspicion on these various people is because they have done something that is seen as suspicious. So it is our job to sit and consider what other reason could they have for doing what they did. Like the guy in the property dispute, maybe he was worried about a confrontation with the neighbors, so he left the area to allow the courts to figure things out. Or the people who didn't allow a search, maybe they have illegal pot plants on their land. We don't know. By not considering other explanations and turning everyone into a suspect, it makes it pretty clear why people might be hesitant to come forward with information. Practically every time anyone talked to the media or a podcaster or a YouTuber about the case, something they said made them the online public spectacle of the week. This was an issue completely created by the online true crime community. People had a high interest in new information on the case, and the TBI was slow to release it. So content creators who wanted to keep the audience they grew based on the disappearance of Summer Wells didn't want to move on from the case and lose that audience. So they kept making videos and going on live streams for hours and hours to dissect someone's property dispute and how that makes them a suspect in the case of a missing child. My hope is that with how close to the vest the TBI has been with the details of the investigation, people will realize that they are safe to come forward to the actual authorities and they won't end up the subject of 700 hours of YouTube content. Important information goes to the police, and they are protecting that information. Of course, the people who have gotten it probably the worst are the family, because, of course, the last theory is going to be that they were involved in whatever happened to Summer. The speculation starts with covering up an accident or a quote-unquote dry drowning, and it goes all the way to people theorizing that they sold her for drugs. The truth is, we don't know a fraction of what the investigators know about this case, and we need to let them do their job. We need to, one, not waste time and resources by calling in tips about how someone's eyes shifted to the left in a TV interview. And then we also have to be careful that as we discuss and speculate on the case, which isn't by itself harmful, we have to make sure we're not defaming people online as we're doing that. Just because someone knew the family doesn't mean they should have their life exposed on YouTube. That is what will prevent people from coming forward with real information. Since November of 2022, the TBI has released very few statements in regards to the case. In June of 2023, right around the second anniversary of Summer's disappearance, they issued a statement that included no new information. It actually explicitly says, "We have no new details to share." But it did say the FBI, TBI, and Sheriff's Office continued to follow up on leads and perform searches. They also released, alongside the statement, an age progression. They again asked the public to stop sharing things that come from non-official sources and send them credible tips only. And then about 2 years after that, in August of 2025, a new age progression was released, but again, no new information was given. I will post the age progression on my social media, but you can also see it on the National Center for Missing and Exploited Children website. The most recent information about this case came just a month ago. In mid-November 2025, a search was done about 9.5 miles down Beach Creek Road from the Wells family home. What was officially released about this was that they conducted a search and that it had to do with Summer Wells. That's about all we know, except, thanks to public records, we know that the property in the overall area they searched was owned by family members of one of the Wells' neighbors. And that neighbor is one of the many people who people online think should be a person of interest. So I get that it is interesting that it appears that it was his family's property being searched. But remember what I said about how, in this case and most others, we need to think about alternative explanations before we have a witch hunt? In this area, a lot of people are related to each other. If Summer was abducted and it was by a family member of a neighbor, that wouldn't necessarily mean the neighbor was involved or knew what was going on. It just means there are only so many families living in this rural area. The TBI has made it clear that they continue to follow up on all credible leads and tips, and going directly to them will not only preserve the integrity of the investigation, it will help shield you, the witness, from an online witch hunt. If alive today, Summer would be 9 years old, about to turn 10 in February. At the time she went missing, she was wearing a pink shirt and gray pants or shorts, and it is not known if she was wearing socks or shoes. She has blonde hair and blue eyes, and at the time she went missing, Summer's hair was cut short into a buzz cut. That is another thing people think is odd, but Summer would be far from the first girl I've seen with a buzz cut. So life experience influences how we see this. Summer normally wore her hair in a longer style, more typical of what you'd expect of a little girl, so the age progression images do reflect that. If you think you see Summer Wells out and about, snap a photo and call 911. The TBI asks that you do not post about it on social media, because if it is Summer, you will have just tipped off the person who has her that they've been spotted. Let the TBI run down the lead first. If you have any tips or information, you can call the TBI at 1-800-TBI-FIND or NCMEC at 1-800-THE-LOST.